year. And I'm going to say nothing more about them because they have a story to tell us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bob.
It's all right, mate.
Mike, thank you for giving us the invitation to be here and chance to tell our story. It's warm in here. I hope you're awake, and we'll try to excite you and keep you awake as we go. Tell our story. So my name's Gav.
I'm Sally.
And we want to tell you what has brought us to this point in our lives. And looking back over sort of my Christian experience, which started when I was 20 as a student in Newcastle upon Tyne, I can see how, how everything builds, doesn't it? Everything builds towards where you are now. As a seeker, I was really impacted by a Baptist preacher from America called Luther King, and just his passion for justice got me as a non-believer and helped me on my journey to Christ. Skip forward a few years, I ended up going down the road, down the A1 to Spurgeon's College, and somebody gave us a word there that was unexpected, and it was from Proverbs 31:8, about speaking up for those who have no voice. Didn't quite know what to do with it. I studied Desmond Tutu. He became a huge hero of mine at college. Not that I met him, but you know what I mean. And then we went to Morden, a little Baptist church in South London, for 18 years, where we failed a lot. I like this stuff up there about learning from your failures. We failed a lot in Morden with missional communities, alternative gatherings, new expressions of church, all that kind of thing. Trying to turn the church inside out and encouraging people to express the church outside of the building. Little did I realize that it would happen to me as well. So our story, I guess, is about being moved, God calling us from the meeting place to the marketplace.
So 15 years ago, God broke my heart in a rather spectacular way. I heard a young man called Ben Cooley, who is now the CEO of a charity called Hope for Justice, talk about an issue that he called human trafficking. He told me that men and women and girls and boys were often, not always, but often from very poor and vulnerable backgrounds, were preyed upon by a trafficker, and that trafficker would promise them a hope and a future, something that I should have been promising them, but for a whole different reason. And that hope and a future ended up with these people being coerced to somewhere else. And when they got to this somewhere else, they realised that the stark reality was a lot worse where they were now than the awful poverty that they'd actually left. They may well have been raped, they may well have been forced to work 18-hour days, they may have organs harvested, all sorts of things would happen to them for years and years. It was a very dark time for me. The more I looked into it, the more I questioned God. Are you really there if this is happening underneath my nose, underneath your nose? Can you really be there? And it was a time of doubt, but it was also a time of strong calling when God broke my heart and put it back together again with Proverbs 31. Speak up for those that have no voice, ensure justice for those who are crushed. And that I knew after that day 15 years ago I would never be the same again, and I haven't. Many years of that was spent in the church leading with Gav, but now we are following the justice call and just continuing that journey.
And after she went to hear Ben Cooley, she said, Gav, you've got to go and hear this guy. I did, and I ended up cycling across Europe with him. Grabbed us both. Anyway, step back a few years. Many of you are ordained. Those of you who've not know what happens at an ordination. Big party, a few sandwiches afterwards, maybe a present. I wonder what presents you were given. I had a love of ice cream, and two great friends of mine bought me, for my ordination, an ice cream maker and a Ben & Jerry's recipe book. They are friends to thank God for. So I got into making homemade ice cream, just experimenting and playing around with it. And I got to enjoy it, did it for birthdays and then the odd charity event and stuff like that. And it seemed to go well. And we were happily, would I say happily? We were going through the trials and tribulations of church leadership, fairly happily, when I was serving ice cream up to my kids and Sally at the table. We have 3 children. And I had one of those dreamy moments, blue sky thinking moments that I encourage people to have. And I said, you know what, if we ever had a shop one day, scooping ice cream, it would be an ice cream shop, and, we'd do it for social justice, we'd provide employment for survivors of trafficking, that sort of thing.
And I said, oh, you could call it Just Ice.
And we all went, ooh. And I couldn't put it down. And you got the idea, and when the vision takes hold of your heart, you just can't run away, even if you try. And argue with God that, well, you're doing this job at the moment, so how could you possibly do that? And maybe try to run them at the same time, which is what we tried to do initially.
So we went to a Hope for Justice conference, and we talked about it and decided that actually we could run no more, and this was something that God was actually calling us to do. We assumed then it would be alongside of our existing jobs. I'm a physio, and we got home from this conference, and on the doormat was a magazine that said across the front, "Just Start." So we took it, and I've kept it, and we decided to start on this journey, and it's grown ridiculously out of all proportion to what we thought was going to happen. But God has increased our faith mightily. There are so many stories which time doesn't allow us to tell you, but just tiny snippets. A patient is an intellectual property lawyer and has agreed with their massive London firm to do all of our legal work pro bono, which was a massive boost for us. They they applied for us to have the name Just Ice, as you have to do legally, and they said, I'm really sorry, it's owned by a big corporate. It was owned by Danone, but they said, as it happens, I believe they said as luck would have it, but as it happens, she said, we are Danone's lawyers, so we can speak to them if you like. So they spoke, and Danone gave us the name Just Ice.
So things like that really encouraged us that without trying, God was opening doors and flying them across. And then we reached the point that we realized that God wanted us to throw everything into this. That was a huge wrench for us, because we'd spent 18 years in our church and in our community, and that was home for us. But we quickly realized that, well, this thing could go anywhere, really. So where do you want us to go, Lord? We also, Sally, very quickly pointed us out that if we left that job...
We don't have a house.
Yeah, which you all know, the challenges of living in Manchester, and obviously we weren't going to be in one. So we knew we'd have to leave, and of course being in London, well, we wouldn't be able to get anything there. Who could? Okay, where, Lord? Now, I was thinking Devon. But Sally was washing up, were you at the kitchen sink? Yeah. You were praying, and God just dropped the word Derby into her head. Now, we'd never been to Derby, not for any other reason, that we'd just never been. And I had just been invited that week to spend a day at a church in Derby, and spouses were invited. So I said, well, actually, it's weird that you should say that. We're going in 2 weeks. And then every road led to Derby after that. It was, in earthly terms, it was spooky, but in spiritual terms, God was slapping us around the face saying, go to Derby. I'd been on a bike ride, and we'd prayed with our children that from Psalm 25:4 about God showing us a sign for the road to take. I stopped for a drink on my bike, and I looked up, and there was this sign saying Derby Arms. That's just outside the Epsom races, by the way. And then at our leaving service, we had been looking at a stall in the market hall in Derby, the old market hall, if you know it. And at our leaving service, a friend came up and said, oh, look, I'm really, really sorry. And I thought he was meaning, because you're going, but he didn't. He was, I'm really sorry. I had a dream with you in it a few months ago now. And it was your name with an address, and I've just written it down. He said, I've never had this before. And it was one of his first sort of prophetic things. And it was the address that led us to the market hall. And he'd had the dream in half term in February when we'd been up to visit, and he didn't know that. So all these things kind of added together to drop us in Derby to start an ice cream business.
So our vision is very simple. It's to be a voice to the voiceless and to ensure justice for those who are oppressed. Put in slightly more business-like fashion, I guess, is to see people who have been trafficked or who have been the victim of being child soldiers restored. It's all about restoration and justice, and people finding their voice.
And as you've heard, if you've engaged with the subject of human trafficking or child soldiers, then you know it's a darn depressing and painful subject, and it makes you just weep. And we get to tell this story to lots of places, many non-Christian places, university, and all kinds of places. And it's a tough story, and we just have to say, bear with us for a few minutes. This is horrible. You're not going to enjoy it. But then we say, because there's something good coming later, because there's ice cream in the story. So our strapline is either the goodness in a scoop or the joy of ice cream for the joy of freedom. And how to tackle human slavery? Ice cream! Yay! The foolishness of God, hey? We've just got 3 values that we've got into our business, and we're trying to bring issues that we've learned over the years in terms of God's kingdom into the business world and be a witness in that realm too. So freedom, obviously, and I have the OCD that many preachers have of alliteration, and do we need deliverance for that? I don't know, but I've still got it. Freedom, very clearly. Fairness, in the sense, the prophets speak about justice for the poor, and that our worship is nothing if we're not fair to the oppressed. And so we want to bring fair trade into all of our business, so as much of our ingredients, all of our chocolate, all that kind of stuff is fairly traded, but we want to apply it through all of our kind of business principles, from the banking that we use, the cotton we use for our uniforms, the wood we use in our shop for the furniture, to everything, the packaging to be completely compostable, all that kind of stuff. And it's a challenge being a small business, but being committed to those kind of values. And thirdly, friendship, because we want our shops to be places of community where people find healing and restoration.
So on the 31st of March, 6 months later than we thought, because we're very naive and inexperienced, we opened in Derby Market Hall. We opened with 18 flavours, but now 9 months on, we've made about 55. And it was opened by the Bishop of Derby, who's a big anti-trafficking campaigner, although he's now retired. But another blessing God gave us is we started going to a local church we felt God had called us to in Derby, and it's a new church plant, so everybody was new. And a guy walked up to us and he said, I've just heard what you're doing. And he said, God has really blessed me in my business, and I would like to bless you, and I would like to give you a gift. And always enthusiastic for gifts. I said, that's lovely, thank you. What is your business? And he said, I make ice cream trikes. I said, what a lovely. And I said, what gift are you thinking? Not wanting to be too presumptive. And so here is Wilbur, who will be serving you. He's very excited to be serving you ice cream later on tonight. And he's named after William Wilberforce. And he comes everywhere with us now.
Wilbur has a big sister called Rosa, named after Rosa Parks. And she's a mobile ice cream van. We actually haven't used her yet. We've nearly finished kitting her out, but she's gorgeous, and she'll help us go to fairs, events, weddings, that kind of stuff. Very, very excited. Now, something like that costs about 10 grand, and a lovely couple came up to us and said, we'd like to buy it for you.
It's bonkers. It's been absolutely
been
bonkers.
And we've had years of hard graft of stuff, so, hear that. Do you know what I mean? We're just gobsmacked by the way God has opened doors with this, which has just kept us going, kept us following the road.
So the next step, 2 weeks ago, we had the privilege of meeting the lady who will be our first employee. So we exist basically to provide employment for people who have been trafficked. That's our reason for being, and we've met 6 survivors so far, but it's very, very complicated for all sorts of reasons. But we now have a lady that is going to start with us in March on her to continue her road to recovery. Rescue from trafficking is not an event, it's a process.
And really, long term, we want to see just ISIS in every city where there's charities working already with people and safe accommodation. And it'll go where it'll go, won't it, in terms of what God wants to do. So please follow us, please support us. We're on all the social media. Look out for us. We've got a radius in terms of how far we can tow reasonably, because we're a business, don't you know? and we've got to balance the books. So we'd love to come and support in any way. Just get in touch with us, and we'll come to events that you're interested in.
So let's leave you with a quote that has challenged us greatly over the last couple of years. If your dreams don't scare you, they aren't big enough. Ephesians 3 says that God is capable of doing immeasurably more than we ask or imagine, and I've known that verse and loved it, but we have seen it to be true over the last 12 months. Thank you.
Thanks.